7 o'clock when we are recording.
We'll call to order today's meeting. We have a
recording in progress.
So sorry, go ahead.
I'll try that again. Here, I'll tap it again. There. Calling tonight's City of Corcoran Planning Commission meeting to order. Roll call. Brummond.
Here.
Lanterman here. Lind.
Here.
Not present will be Commissioners Horn and Vandenighty, but we do have a quorum. I would ask you all to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do the commissioners and staff, are there any amendments to tonight's agenda?
I do not have any changes, Mr. Chair.
No.
Any? No? Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda. Could I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. And that, I need a vote too, don't I? Yes. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I'd like to now open the floor to the public to participate in our open forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address items of concern or just items on things that are not already on tonight's agenda. Is there anything that you would like to address at this point? Okay. Natalie, do we have anyone online?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone online.
Okay, let me see here. And I don't need to officially close that, do I? There's nothing for us to close. Okay. I'd like to, or could I have someone make a motion to approve the agenda, or is that the meeting minutes from September 7th?
Chair, I don't believe those were in the packet.
They were not.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Well, that was an error. So,
But I didn't catch it prior to tonight, so I apologize.
No,
I'm just like, oh.
either.
So I don't know if we want to wait and try to do that next month.
Can we just slip that in on next month's
Yes.
Yeah.
meeting and?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
definitely do that.
Okay, awesome. So
That was me.
I'll make a motion to just postpone the approval of those minutes until our next meeting. If I could get a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. Okay, new business. Natalie?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our first item tonight is a public hearing for a zoning ordinance amendment to the accessory structure section in 1030.020. So City Council directed staff recently to prepare a zoning ordinance amendment regarding eave and overhang flexibility for certain accessory structures. So just a little bit of background. Eaves and overhangs are a specific requirement for our accessory structures, and we don't really define those, but historically, staff has interpreted eaves to mean the underside along the side or the soffit, and then the overhang is the edge of the roof that extends over the front or rear elevation. So we found this nice graphic that we feel really represents that well. Next slide. Currently, the section in question provides the minimum required dimensions of eaves and overhangs based on the sidewall height of the newly proposed building. And it is believed by staff that these requirements were initially adopted to ensure accessory structures have a residential aesthetic. So this is what it currently reads as in code. Next slide. So a resident asked the City Council to consider changing this regulation to allow for a new accessory structure to have a 12-inch overhang where 18 inches would otherwise be required. There were a couple reasons why this was requested, including that his existing accessory structures were built before this ordinance was adopted, and he preferred to have the overhangs of the new building match his existing structures. So council directed staff to add a clause to the section that allows for this flexibility. Next slide. So based on council direction, staff prepared an amendment that would include the diagram found so that we run into less confusion with even overhang, as that is something that constantly is addressed as a condition of approval that's handled on the back end. It never seems to get quite right on the plans. And then the zoning administrator, and then the additional clause would be the zoning administrator may provide flexibility from this requirement in situations where the new accessory structure matches an existing legal non-conforming accessory structure located on the same property. Next slide. So there are some small concerns from staff part about this clause, just because it may be really difficult if plans aren't on file to confirm the dimensions and confirm that it's a legal building. And we do think that a 12-inch overhang and or eave would accomplish the residential aesthetic. Don't necessarily see a need to continue having additional overhang based on the sidewall increases. So staff would also recommend for consideration that we just kind of simplify the whole section and just change it to all accessory structures shall be constructed with eaves and overhangs that are a minimum of 12 inches in length. With this, we don't necessarily need to include the diagram because it no longer really is relevant, what is what. But we still could if that would be preferred by the Planning Commission, just for ease of understanding. Next slide. So recommendation is to open the public hearing and take testimony. The Planning Commission has the following options. Recommend approval of the draft ordinance or resolution with findings of fact as prepared based on council direction. Recommend approval of the drafts utilizing the staff prepared language or other desired changes, and then recommend denial of the draft ordinance and resolution. That's what I have.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open up the public hearing on this now. In-person comments will be taken first, followed by those joining us online tonight. Sir, do you have any comments on this?
Is it required for, is a 12-inch overhang currently required for the main structure?
No.
There is no overhang or eave requirement?
No, it's only for accessory structures. And I'm so sorry, if you have any additional comments, if you could approach the podium.
Yeah, we just want to be able to make sure that those online can hear
So
your
look at your
comments.
name and address.
My name is Joe Borthers, 19340 102nd Avenue North. I guess my question is, there are, of the main structure in a residential that you're saying there is no minimum requirement for an overhang?
Correct.
But you're proposing one for an accessory structure?
Yeah, there already is an eaves and overhang requirement for accessory structures specifically. Again, I believe it's typical for residential structures to have eaves and overhangs, so I think that's why we don't have a requirement per se.
But there are structures in our development without eaves or overhangs in the new development. And so I find it interesting that you're requiring it for an accessory structure if you don't have the requirement for the main structure. Seems odd.
Fair enough. We don't have that requirement, do we? Or do
We do not, but what tonight's action would do, if the council approved it, would reduce the current standards for accessory structures. It is unusual not to have eaves and overhangs on residential homes. But what used to be very common, I see it less, but if you think about old ag buildings, there's no eave or overhang. The wall literally comes to the roof. And this was adopted because Corcoran, in about 2000, I think this was adopted, wanted to have a more residential aesthetic to those buildings. So that's the history. I'm not entirely sure in terms of residential structures why there's not an eave overhang requirement, except that it's very rare not to have it.
But yeah, in his development. Yeah, well, I get your point. I get your point.
So the purpose of eaves and overhangs, there's a couple of reasons why you have them. One of them being it diverts water from the structure.
Right.
There is a purpose for it, and we
Well-
can certainly look at adding it if it's something that we wanted. Or a recommendation could be to remove this requirement, but then the residential aesthetic that it was trying to accomplish, we would be changing that goal. And that wasn't the direction from council, so that's just where that's at.
Did council, were they aware of this kind of inconsistency between outbuildings and the residential buildings? Like, did that come up in that? I wasn't here for that meeting.
I was not at that meeting either. I was in Hawaii. So I don't know if exactly that question came up. We have talked about minimum residential standards before, and there are no overhang requirements, and that has been something that we've looked at with the council.
Should we close the public hearing first?
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
let's close
Well,
the
okay,
Unless there's other people, and then we can continue this riveting discussion.
I agree.
hold that thought, sir. Do we have anyone online?
Members of the public online, if you'd like to participate in the public hearing for the zoning ordinance amendment related to accessory structures, please utilize the raise your hand function in the reactions menu. Mr. Chair, no one's raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing, if I could get a second.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and that closes the public hearing.
I would mention, I was at the meeting, the council meeting, when this was discussed, and the resident made this comment. It did not come up, the inconsistency between a primary residence and the accessory building. But what did come up was the most important priority being that whatever happens with an accessory structure, match what is existing on the property, home or another accessory building. And that being the priority. And I'm not gonna quote exactly, but a member of city council said, we just built a building with no eave or overhang.
Mr. Chair, I apologize, Kendra and I stand corrected. We do have a requirement that all residential dwellings shall have roof overhangs which extend a minimum of 1 foot from the exterior wall or the structure. So I don't know,
It's the same.
what development are you in?
Do I have to go there?
Oh, yeah. I didn't write down his address.
I'm in the Bellwether development, and there are several structures that do not have the overhang, and were all built in the last 3 years. And I'm assuming they passed city inspection.
Yeah, I suppose we would need to take a look and be able, that surprises me because our construction services specialist is pretty good at confirming everything. But we would need to take a look. So if there are addresses you're able to send me of what structures we're talking about, if we're talking about like specific homes, is it your homes, but it doesn't have, okay. And so we could look at your home and the building plans and see if it was built to the building plan.
My home has yours.
They do have overhangs, okay, I'm sorry, I
It's not mine, but
misunderstood.
I think there's 5 or 6
In your neighborhood?
in the development.
Okay, all right. Are you comfortable sharing addresses with us?
You don't have to share them right now, but yeah.
Yeah, not
I
now.
don't
Yeah.
know them, but I could
Yeah.
look them up and.
Feel free to email me and we can certainly take a look to make sure the buildings were built per plan.
Yeah, because, he raises a good point, and if we're concerned about the aesthetics of an accessory building, and we're requiring these, then it would just seem to me that we would also need language requiring them on the primary buildings, but it sounds like we have that.
Yes, we do.
So it sounds like some buildings may be out of compliance.
Yes, and we can
Okay.
address that as a separate issue if they weren't built per the plan, so we can take a look at that and research that a bit more.
Okay,
But yeah, as far as consistency, it's a minimum 12-inch overhang and eave for residential structures elsewhere, when they're the primary building. So that would, again, be consistent with staff's recommendation versus the
okay.
first proposal.
So the code that you just referenced, is that that's not the same code that we're currently entertaining edits to?
Correct.
No, that section, Mr. Chair, is 1060.050, excuse me, subdivision B5.
I'm sorry, 1060.050?
50, yes.
Sub 5?
B5.
Oh, B5, okay.
It's the residential design
So
standard.
would it, let me ask you, not that it really matters, but would it make sense to take the edits that we're currently discussing and kind of wrap them into the code chapter referencing the home overhangs? Wouldn't it make sense to kind of cover homes and outbuildings or accessory buildings under the same code, or am I just overthinking this?
I do think we are overdue for a very comprehensive overhaul, but the change in front of us tonight addresses the situation that the council asked staff to move forward with.
Okay.
And that could definitely be something that we look at incorporating differently. Right now we have an accessory section, and then we have like an architectural, we have a building performance standards. And I'm tentative to have this be a part of that because A, we'd have to renotice the public hearing.
Sure.
And B, what the point she's talking about is specific to, it's not accessory structures necessarily, it's talking about primary buildings. So I think it'd be better to have it called out within the accessory structure section.
If the 12-inch matches a primary residence, that seems to make sense to me. That seemed like a very simplified option. The question that I found myself asking while reviewing this was, is our priority to have 12 inches, or is our priority for something to match the existing structure on the residence? Like, how are we trusting residents to match what already exists, whether it's 12 inches or not? Do we want to prioritize things matching, or do we want to prioritize them being 12 inches? That was the question I found myself asking.
I feel like, if I could, Natalie, that that's what she's talking about when there's the clause. So we can decide that we want the clause, correct, in the ordinance where it says the zoning administrator may provide flexibility in situations where a new accessory structure matches an existing legal non-conforming accessory structure located on the same property. I think that the reason why the proposal was maybe to just go to 12 inches and not have that on there is for the simplicity of what it would take if permit.
For sure.
And I think, I understand, matching, but I would think that if you're building something under new, like current standards, like I think our barn doesn't have overhangs on two sides, and then it's got, but it was built in like the 70s, right? I don't know, for us to put up an accessory structure and then have overhangs on all sides, to me it just is, if it simplifies the process and it maintains a standard, I don't think it's a significant difference in aesthetic to have a 12-inch overhang. If somebody wanted to go for more, I'm assuming they can do more if they want to. It's just we can't drop below that 12-inch.
But you raise a great point. It's like if you have an existing historical structure that looks great and does not have 12 inches, and you want to build something that matches at your property, in this ordinance, you would have to have 12 inches, and what if you don't want to?
I think aesthetically there would be ways to tie the two accessory structures together with still meeting the 12-inch overhang. And if for some reason you were intent on not doing it, then the process would be to apply for.
Well, and that's a great point, Commissioner Lind. When writing this, I'm assuming a 12-inch minimum, and that did not come clear with this language currently proposed. But the property owner that requested this be reevaluated was committing to a 12-inch overhang. So I don't think the intent was to go below 12 inches. So if we were to proceed with the first option from the council direction, I would recommend adding not to be reduced under 12 inches.
Even with the clause?
Yes.
Okay.
Accessory structures that are used for agricultural purposes are exempt from the eaves and overhangs rule.
Sure.
So, but yeah, the accessory structures that are residential in nature are supposed to have those eaves and overhangs.
So if you were putting up an ag building and you wanted it to match your other ag buildings,
Then that's
then you
fine.
are welcome to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're putting up a shed,
Yes.
then it needs to have a minimum of 12-inch overhangs.
Where is the market headed on overhangs as part of
I did not complete
being
the market
aesthetically?
study.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't mean to cause that as a challenging question. I'm just wondering, like, does it serve a functional purpose?
It does. It keeps water away
Yeah,
from the building.
okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, honestly, in 20 years, this is the first time it's come up as an issue. So most people are building them. And it just doesn't come up a lot, but it seemed to make sense to the council in this case. He had gotten approval through a different method in about 2004, was that
A
right?
little bit before that.
For a
yeah.
smaller eve, and it just made sense with this council to modify the ordinance rather than going through I think it was a conditional use process last time that the city used to approve it, if I remember right, not a variance. Irrelevant, but he had gotten approval for an addition with a smaller eve to match an existing building previously, so.
But he's still saying 12 inches.
I would make a motion to move forward with the language and standardizing 12 inches in length.
Could I ask you to just hit pause on that?
Okay.
I have a couple of additional questions.
Sorry.
And, no, that's okay. So, I'm concerned about what I've heard tonight as, you know, aside from this, that we have some homes that may not be in compliance. I assume that this commission can ask for, you know, one of our inspectors to go out and maybe get an explanation why we have an inconsistency between our code and what this gentleman reported to us tonight. Is there someone that we could, I'm just curious as to how that
Me too.
slipped by.
Yeah,
You
no,
know.
that's something you could definitely work with our construction services specialists
Okay,
to see, just take a look at the building permits in the area and see if there's something that's not complying with
okay. And
A, the plans, and B, the
not
ordinance.
intending to try to stir up for this gentleman's neighbors, but I think fair is fair, because if it was his home, there could be some enforcement action, you know? So I get what he's saying, and I'm just curious to find out why this slipped through. So, but, you know, I'm not tying that to this at all. I don't think that would be appropriate, but I would be curious. So I would respectfully ask that someone be given that task and maybe get back to us at the next meeting.
Yes, if, we can try to take a look to see if it's immediately obvious. I'm a little
Sure.
concerned not knowing the addresses beforehand, committing to that before the next meeting.
Okay.
Because there are several homes in that development. So
Okay.
I would like to have at least the general area
Sure.
before I work with Mr. Pritchard on that.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Does that address your concern?
You know, and maybe there's a waiver they could have applied for. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to get anybody-
who knows? We'll figure it out, but we do appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Commissioner, I think you have a motion.
Yes, I have a motion to approve the language on a 12-inch standard for overhangs as a minimum, moving forward.
May I ask, in the motion that she's making, do we need to make an indication about whether or not we feel like the graphic needs to be included, or no?
If you'd like to go, yeah, I would say if you want the graphic, then make that clear.
Okay. I'm willing to second the motion. I do not have a feeling one way or the other about eaves and overhangs. I am like whether the graphic is in there, I'm an individual where if I don't understand something, I would look it up. However, I could see if it feels beneficial to staff because you get so many questions about it on the back end, then feel free to retain the graphic in the code if that feels like it's beneficial.
Up to staff discretion on the graphic requirement.
Okay, can I get a second?
I seconded.
I'll third it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. That was a good discussion. Thank you for your input, sir. Okay, are we already at the staff report?
Yes, and
Okay. Natalie, whenever you're ready.
thank you. All right, so the second item is a bit more involved in terms of length, but should be fairly easy. The 6B public hearing is for minor subdivision and zoning ordinance edits. Go ahead. City Council authorized staff in September to prepare a code amendment for several updates to the subdivision and zoning ordinances. The goal of the update was to address staff-identified typos and inconsistencies found throughout the ordinance. Additionally, some minor revisions that were not expected to be controversial were included, such as increasing the public hearing radius from 350 feet to 500 feet, which has been an ongoing goal of the council. So staff has provided a working list, not lot, working list of subdivision and zoning ordinance edits to the council for at least the last 3 years that has continued to grow. This is the list. I'm not going to go over all of this because a lot of it is numbers. So next slide. The enclosed draft ordinance to address these items is 32 pages with 77 sections of code updates. The updates include a few minor typographical errors, such as adding a period here, removing a duplicate B in a list, and then a lot of the focus is on clarifications and handling some inconsistencies. So we revised several definitions, including building line, setback, daycare, structure, what we consider to be major roadways, upland. We removed a term that is no longer used anywhere in the ordinances, greenway corridor land, and then updated multiple family apartment and townhome definitions to now be consistent with our rental dwelling ordinance adopted this year. Additional clarifications and inconsistencies. We updated the rural commercial architectural standards. The way it was worded suggested that they could only do one building material, which wasn't quite what was meant. And then also clarified that how the wall facade was calculated in terms of their ability to use a specific material. Updated all 2030 comprehensive plan references to 2040. We still had a couple of places of worship / assembly references when we updated that to places of worship a couple years ago, so to clean that up. We had some confusion over daycare facilities. For example, the way that we have used daycare facilities in residential districts and in one commercial district, we have clarified that commercial daycares were allowed. But then in other commercial districts, we were relying on language used in our residential districts. So it suggested that a commercial daycare facility wouldn't be allowed, but a home daycare would be in a commercial district. So we cleaned that up so it's consistent and now matches with our definition. That kind of broke these two out. So then we also replaced a random interim use permit reference regarding accessory dwelling unit approvals, and we changed that to the applicable review process because if you recall, it could not be an administrative permit or a CUP in some districts or in the rural residential district. And then provided consistent language regarding lot dimension deviations and the use of planned unit developments in our open space and preservation plats. And updated cul-de-sac length requirements to refer to our Corcoran engineering design standards because the previous language suggested that there wasn't a limit, which does not align with our design standards. And a limit in length, I should clarify. And then we had some slightly bigger changes. We still considered them minor, but the changes were intended to align with city practices, goals, or provide consistent processes. So this included specifically adding a wetland and topographic survey waiver requirement. This is something we already do. It's already a land use application type, but it's nowhere in code. So we've now codified that process and actually have are requesting it to be an administrative process to save time and processing costs. As it's usually something that our engineers can take a look at and get a good idea if we really need to know this information, and council does not typically deviate from this engineering recommendation. Allowing decorative fence elements such as a spade cap on structural posts to not count towards the height, while clarifying fence toppers do count towards height. Increasing public hearing radius to 500 feet. Providing consistent processes for...
If I could interrupt, what
Sure.
does that mean? The increased public hearing radius to 500?
Public hearing notice radius, I apologize. But yes, it's the So anytime there's a public hearing, so land applications that require public hearing, which is our plats, our conditional use permits, interim use permits, they have a 350-foot radius. That's what's required by state law. Council has wanted to increase that to 500 for at least the last year.
Okay.
So we're just making that change now.
Okay, thank you.
Providing consistent processes for extension requests for land use approvals. Allow at-grade improvements such as decks and patios to encroach up to 6 feet into setbacks as long as they are not in a drainage and utility easement. This was something that we already allow for wetland setbacks, but it was not specifically allowed for required setbacks. So just again, making that consistent. If we're going to allow it for wetland setbacks, why wouldn't we allow that for a rear setback? Provide City Council with more discretion to determine when a subdivision may or may not be deemed premature. Again, this is something they already tend to use their discretion with, and so it's just clarifying that they have discretion with that. And then added standards for private drives in urban residential districts as deemed appropriate. Right now, our code only allows private drives in the rural residential specifically. However, our urban reserve district that can be a holding zone for the next 20 years and potentially beyond, they still can rely on private drives if they were to subdivide per their limited options, as well as townhomes rely on private drives. So we are seeing people want to use these, and we have approved them as part of PUDs. This just allows it for certainty so that you don't have to go through a PUD process, especially for urban reserve subdivision. That wouldn't make sense. And it would, again, still be to the discretion of the city to determine when it's appropriate, but providing clear standards for these private drives. Next slide. And then I'm sorry to do this to you, but as you will see, there is a slightly revised ordinance on the dais. As I was looking at the PUD ordinance for something else, I realized that we made an update earlier this year that included 350 feet, so that needs to get corrected to 500. So I inserted it as section 61 because just so that it was continuous the way that I had formatted this. So it kind of had to insert, and then also just clarifying that as part of the neighborhood meeting held prior to an application submittal, minutes simply need to be provided that go over who attended and the feedback received. And yes, the Planning Commission should open the public hearing and take testimony. The Planning Commission has the option to recommend approval of the draft ordinance and resolution with findings of fact as prepared. What is considered prepared is the new ordinance at your dais. That would include the revision. Or you can make additional changes, or you can recommend denial of the draft ordinance and resolution. Feel free to let me know anything that I went over too quickly if there was questions. I know some of it was a bit more involved than I may have suggested. I'm assuming you read the staff report to give a bit more context, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you, Natalie. With that, I'd like to open the public hearing. In-person comments will be taken first, followed by those of you joining us via Zoom. Sir, do you have any comments? Anyone online? Questions, comments?
Members of the public online, if you'd like to participate in the public hearing for the zoning and subdivision amendments for minor cleanup, please raise your hand now utilizing the function in the reactions menu. No one is raising their hand.
Okay, with that, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing. Could I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed. I do have a couple of questions. Let's see. Could you pull your slides back up? Is that possible? If you could go back one slide. Okay, so here, this may sound funny, but do we have a definition of exactly what qualifies as a neighborhood meeting? What if I have one person? Does that qualify as a neighborhood meeting?
As long as they do the notice to 500 feet, no one could attend, and that would still be the neighborhood meeting requirement.
Okay.
They can't force people to attend a meeting.
Oh, they can't? Oh, those rogues. And then, could you go back to, let's see, back, there's another analysis slide, and it states that we're gonna get, well, let me see, it's the one that says city council will have more discretion. Where is that? Yeah,
With the-
to
to
determine when a subdivision may or may not be deemed premature. What does that mean? What discretion do they have now, and how does this increase that level of discretion?
Yes, so right now, I'm trying to find a specific section here. Oh, first one, awesome.
Yeah, it's right on the front.
I'm looking at the staff report, so that wasn't helpful. So basically, right now,
Code?
there we go, so good, thank you. Right now, it says any proposed subdivision deemed premature shall not be approved by the city council. A subdivision shall be deemed premature if the council determines that any of the following conditions exist. It's the burden on the applicant to show that it is not premature. And so it provides,
Why is that not showing?
oh,
What do I need to do here?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this and see if
That
that's.
might help.
There we go.
So it provides, these standards, so it's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, inconsistent with our capital improvement program, lack of adequate water supply.
So is this our current code or the proposed?
Yes, this is our current code, so
Okay.
this is what they're supposed to look at.
Okay,
However, we have had several variance requests for properties specifically in the urban reserve where it theoretically could be said that they are premature because they wouldn't meet these standards because it's within the MUSIP, but water is not available. But the reality is they won't need water because they're going to use wells and they don't necessarily need those services for what we're looking to propose. So we've granted variances to bypass that, and so this is simply saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is simply saying that the council has the ability to say that they're the ones that ultimately can say if it doesn't meet these standards, it is premature, or they can say, well, because of X, Y, and Z, this is not a premature development. So it gives them a little bit more say with the use of may instead of shall to be
Okay.
able to come to that conclusion
Okay,
based on the
so-
development.
okay, so the main language change is from shall to may.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
all right,
And then it strikes the burden of proof.
Okay.
That last sentence.
okay, gotcha, thank you.
Because that subdivision 8, it was just a repetition, so that is also
Oh,
down
sure.
here.
That they
Okay,
have to prove.
Yeah.
okay,
So,
that's it for my questions. Any discussion?
I do have a couple, and again, it's probably more just for clarification rather than like an issue with it. The notification for the radius, the only reason, because obviously it always sounds better to notify more people, but there is an additional cost associated with that to widen the radius. And I just think that we need to be aware of that because it could be fruitless. We could be widening the radius to 500, paying extra money to notify individuals, and then not finding that individuals are attending just because we've widened the radius. And I think it might be pennies, right? It might be dollars, but I think that because it is the taxpayers of Corcoran who are going to be paying for that, it just needs to be noted. And so maybe if we, I don't know how we're gonna gauge whether that is successful or even if it's worth tracking the additional cost. What does that make for us over time? In terms of someone's time, you know.
Commissioner Drummond, I will say a few items regarding that. So our application fee is theoretically supposed to cover the costs, go towards costs such as the public hearing notices, such as the
Okay.
publication to papers. So applicants should be paying for that. However, you're right, if the fee isn't properly capturing the fee, the fees associated with that process, then it would end up being funded by taxpayers as basically an overage.
Okay.
One thing that I'm planning on doing, because I'm a person that likes to make decisions from data, is to better track how
Okay.
much we're spending for public hearing notices to see if we need to reevaluate our fees.
Okay.
I can't really do that until I have some concrete data, but that might be a part of either our 2024 fee schedule update or potentially the following year once we have some. I think we'll have all of 1 month of data before we adopt our 2024 fee
Okay.
schedule, so it might be 2025 more likely.
Okay.
But yeah, and then it could also be a change in process. When I was at Brooklyn Park, this was something that just got charged to the escrow. The fee went to
Okay.
something else entirely, so then it was dependent upon the project.
Okay.
So there are different ways we could handle it if we're finding that it's no longer working as a flat fee.
Okay.
As far as measuring how beneficial.
Like if it's impactful.
Yeah, I would say we have a very involved community and they're all paying attention. And
Right now,
we do put up
right.
development signs as well in most instances. One of like the only exceptions that off the top of my head is for plats less than 3 lots. There might not be a sign posted, but there would still be a public hearing notice sent to surrounding properties. So depending on the application, there are some processes that don't require a public hearing. But if a public hearing is required, they should, if there's no sign, they should still at least see the public hearing notice. But it requires them to look in their mail, and sometimes people see something from the city and they kind of just pass it.
Right.
But there's also word of mouth, so I would say that we do have fairly good attendance with our public hearings. And so it's hard to say if this will improve it or not, but one of the complaints is that people fall just outside of that radius. And so this is kind of hopefully a way to, there's always going to be someone outside of the radius, but basically expand it just a little bit to an even 500, I think was the idea.
Follow-up question then on that. So is the context of this change based on citizen feedback?
Citizen and I think a council desire to make sure that more people are getting notified, yes. But I believe it's ultimately their desire is stemming from citizen feedback.
Okay.
Or resident feedback, I should
Thank
say.
you.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
No, I would just say that I don't have a problem with it, but I would not want to charge even people who are in charge of the project if it isn't fruitful. So if it's something where we can collect data over time to be like, ooh, we've seen so much interaction because we changed that radius and it's beneficial. But it feels like even those folks who are paying those escrow fees or paying those fees, just something to watch for to see if it's worth it, because the information really is out there and available even if they're not within that 350-foot notification radius. Anyway, it's just a thought, but obviously, it's something that I can get behind at this point in time. And then my other question was the one about the extension where we're just removing the commission. And I'm not trying to give us more work because sometimes the best thing to do is to streamline the process, but sometimes the best thing to do is to let the process play out slow, because the more people you have look at something, then sometimes the more checks and balances are in place, right? So that was my only question is can you give me an example? Is this the property that we had on 30 and 19? Would this be an example of this type of a extension request? And is that the type of scenario that we're dealing with? I just wanted to understand better before I was like, sure, we don't.
Sure. No, Commissioner Brennan, happy to explain a bit more of the thinking there. So the item being added to the list had nothing to do with 3019. This was added to the list long before that extension request was in the mix. However, you're correct.
But that's the type of
that
scenario.
Is the
okay.
Type. So one inconsistency we are finding is there was a couple of application types that the commission typically reviews and goes to council that didn't require the commission to read or to review the extension request. And so just trying to make it all application types fairly consistent. The only one that's treated a little different is the administrative approval, since that's typically handled administratively, but still trying to make it as consistent as possible. And then some of the other concerns are it's a 30-day, right now it's 30 days before the end of the expiration that they're supposed to submit this request, and that makes it very difficult to plan with the planning commission.
Sure, to get it on both schedules.
And I would say I would rather they focus on getting the work going than submitting an extension request when they still have time to get the work done, or at least started. So that's, I think, I think the 30 days is correct. I would rather wait till the last possible minute to do an extension request in the hopes that they can get their
Project completed,
or,
Yep,
or
or
get,
started.
Get it started, yes. And then just trying to make the process easier. Your feedback, I know, is always appreciated on things like this in terms of land use, but it's one of those things that the commission tends to vary from the council decision, and so it's just kind of, is it worth our time to review this? We have other things that we would like to review as a commission. However, if you just want that in your discretion still, then I would just recommend all non-administrative applications continue to have the planning commission and just make it, again, consistent over having some that go to the council and some that go to commission and council, because that can be it's hard to keep track of the staff.
Sure, and so what applications would that mean that, when you say if you decide to go that way, which I'm not necessarily saying that we should, I just think that sometimes, but at this point in time, if a project has already been approved, it has come before both bodies. The discussion has been had. Now it's just taking into consideration whether an extension to the project, because the work has not been started, is appropriate. And that's after the first administrative approval, if I'm understanding correctly, right? Okay. And so if this is the only one that is remaining where it's going before the commission and not just the council, or are there other, when you say make it consistent, if we do this and say, okay, yep, the commission doesn't need to review it, then everything is consistent, it would just go before the council applications.
Yeah, so it'd be everything that's in your purview that requires an extension, so that'd be the, I'm gonna to get the exact ones out, but variances are the ones that are in your purview that don't require you currently. As a board or a commission to review before it goes to council. But then CUPs, for example, right now the language, it goes before the commission and the council. So that's one of the inconsistency examples. So if we're going to keep it in the commission, then I would say anything that's under your purview to begin with then you should also be part of the extension. Or if you don't want the extension to be in your purview just for ease of process, then let's just make it so that anything that's all treated the same as much as possible.
Sure. Okay. I appreciate that explanation. I understand now. And then the last question was just regarding that 6 feet into the setback. And again, I'm asking because I know that there has been a couple deck scenarios that have come up, but is this an aside from those particular issues as well? We're saying that we allow build into the wetland setback, why would we not also into other, can you just clarify that?
Yeah, so I don't think there is a specific application that we've looked at that was requesting this as a variance. There was a variance that had a not at grade deck, so it was above grade.
Oh, yep.
So it's a little different, but an above grade deck where they were requesting to go into the setback, and staff had offered the 6-foot encroachment as a potential solution if the council wanted to grant them a variance. So that's, I think, maybe what you're possibly thinking about. But the idea behind this is, again, if we do allow this already for at grade, so when it's an at grade deck or patio, we allow them to encroach up to 6 feet into the wetland setback. And I think the biggest thinking is, okay, well, if we're gonna allow it for wetland setback, why wouldn't we allow that for in a 30-foot rear setback?
Okay.
Especially if it's not gonna conflict with a drainage and utility easement. So it's just allowing it to, the same deviation, you guys try to treat all setbacks consistently as much as possible. And as part of that, when we talk about that encroachment in the wetland section, we've added that to clarify that it can't go into the drainage and utility easement for that one as well. So they're being treated consistently throughout the ordinance.
Okay. And it's then allowing the homeowners or the to utilize more of their lawn space or their yard space as well, is sort of what the intent is. Okay. And I think those were all of my questions, I believe.
I get, and thank you, I appreciate all, that discussion. One thing that was just discussed is some of the inconsistencies. I would prefer that anything that comes under the purview of this commission, I would like coming before the commission,
Okay.
if possible.
For the extension request, because that
Yes.
was also, so if a CUP application we get or whatever, and then they just don't begin the work, then they submit an extension request. That's the coming back part.
Yes, and there are times where there are slight amendments to, small, minor amendments to things that have been before the commission that staff has authority to approve. So I guess I would like some clarification exactly, that there, changes do happen that are not necessarily, it has to be under a certain footprint. And then I believe major CUP changes, I don't remember if those go to the planning commission or just city
Well,
council.
let me just say this, I guess just kind of general guidance. If, and I would like to discuss this further at another time once I've researched the topic a little bit better, but I guess I would just say, if there are items that you would like this commission to consider, don't be shy. I think that we have a pretty smart commission. I'm proud of my colleagues, and we have some brain power here, and we're happy to look at whatever it is you think we should look at. But don't be shy in sending us work.
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, definitely. I think I don't think that staff would shy away from that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If it could somehow be up to staff discretion of a minor or major change, and if it
Well-
requires commission approval.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's something already in code, that there's
Okay.
a minor, and that's what I was just trying to point out that, just because it was originally in your
Right.
review doesn't mean that everything
Yeah.
tends to come back, there's certain thresholds.
Okay.
Can I get a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance number 2023 with all of the changes. I don't have any amendments that I feel like need to be proposed at this time.
Okay, do I need to read this into, Title 9 and Title 10? No, we know what this is, right? I don't need to make a additional record of it, do I?
I don't.
Yeah, no, I think, Mr. Chair, your motion could be the draft resolution and findings of fact prepared by staff.
Okay, all right. Well,
Then you can make a motion.
we have a pending motion recommending approval of the ordinance amending the text of Title 9 and Title 10 of the Corcoran City Code related to minor code updates. And I will second that motion. If we could get a vote, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you for the discussion too. Other business, I'm told there is none. Is that still correct?
Mr. Chair, I do have a couple of
Okay.
items. We did not receive any applications for November, so I would like to officially cancel the November 2nd Planning Commission meeting.
Okay,
And then I have a conflict on December 7th, and I believe there is a chance that we could have a December meeting.
okay.
I'm wondering if we could if we would have a quorum if we were to move that meeting to Tuesday, December 5th at 7 p.m.
I
am
would be
okay
able to
with
make that work, yeah.
Good. Commissioner, would that suit your calendar? December 5th?
I will take a look. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I will send out an official reminder. Let's plan on that, and then if for some reason it were to get canceled, I'll let you know as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Planning project update?
I do not have anything, but if you have questions on the update, feel free to let me know.
I do not. Any questions?
No, it looked good.
No? Okay. I'm sorry that we could not be joined by Council Liaison Schultz, but rest assured he was here in the spirit. The liaison calendar, Commissioner Drummond, are you still available to cover the October 12th City Council?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for doing that. Commissioner Lind, are you still available to cover the November 9th City Council?
Chairman, Commissioner Horn and I have switched. I will be covering October 26th,
Okay.
and he will be covering November 9th, and Natalie has been notified of that via email.
So then I'll amend my question. Are you still available to cover the October 26th
Yes.
meeting? Thank you.
Yes.
I am still available for November 20th. And Commissioner Brumman, I know it's far off, but as it stands tonight, are you still available for the January 11th City Council meeting?
Yes.
And as always, if you do have a scheduling conflict, please give me a call. I'm usually available to cover, so no panic if something in your life comes up.
Very good.
Well, with that said, I would like to adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:56. I would like to note 7:56. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out tonight, sir. We appreciate it.